Okay, now I know. So hey everyone, my name is Vlad, and this talk is about figurative language in user-generated comparisons from the internet. And Brighter Than Gold is a song by the Australian band The Cat Empire. Comparisons are phrases that assert likeness or unlikeness between two things. They're commonly used in language, and they usually point out shared properties. A simple example is sterling is much cheaper than gold, and this is a comparison between two metals, sterling and gold, with respect to a common property, which is the price. Importantly, however, comparisons are not always meant to be taken at their face value, meaning, as in this second example, her voice makes the song shine brighter than gold, because in this case, we do not want to interpret it as a literal comparison between the song and gold, but we want to understand something else from this. So we will call this kind of comparisons figurative comparisons. In literature, we will also find the name similes, and we will denote them with this pinkish color. And to contrast, the literal examples will be called literal comparisons, and we will color them in dark green. In this work, we attempt to understand what makes comparisons figurative or not, and to characterize the difference between the two classes. So figurative comparisons are an instance of figurative language, as alongside metaphor and other kinds of figurative tropes. In NLP, most of the research done considers metaphor, and there has been a lot of work on conceptual source target domain mapping with clustering and so on, such as the work of Ekaterina Shutova. On the slightly simpler problem of identifying whether a sentence is metaphorical or not, there is a lot of work using syntax like tree kernels or shallow semantic word level features, such as the conceptual features of Tsetkov et al. It's a great paper that we rely on heavily during our work. However, on the specific subjects of similes, there has been less work, there are less resources available, but things are very interesting in this area. As Tony Ville points out, there are a lot of connections between similes and irony and humor. So we will explore, we'll computationally explore the difference between literal and figurative comparisons. This is important because comparisons have very important roles for human communication. Comparisons are something that we use often when we want to describe the new in terms of the given. For example, as a kid, if you don't know what a unicorn is or how a unicorn looks like, you might read about it in a children's book and the description might compare it to a horse because you're more likely to know what a horse is or how a horse looks like. And the difference might be specified afterwards. Another important usage pattern of comparisons is to rank items with respect to a property, and this is important if you want to convince somebody to buy your product or not to buy some product that you didn't like. For example, you might say if you want to give a poor review to an adapter that it's less durable than the cord, or the cord is more durable than the adapter. This is a real example from a review. So you can see there is a lot of knowledge that is transmitted using comparison patterns. And this is used in knowledge extraction. There is research using such comparison patterns to learn common sense knowledge bases or to learn similarities between the names of cities based on what people say about them and what they compare them to. However, in order for this to work well, we need to either make the assumption that the comparisons you extract from large corpora are literal, or we need to have a way to tell whether they're literal or figurative, which is what we attempt to do in this work. So this goes back to the more generic problem of identifying and characterizing figurative language, but we are in the specific context of comparisons. So we rely on the main intuition that context is important for figurative language. And when I say context, I don't just mean the text that occurs surrounding a language instance, but there is also a social context and a topical context that we assume has strong connections with the use of figurative language. So the questions we ask, driven by this insight, are: can we use topic information to differentiate literal and figurative comparisons? Can we take advantage of the structure of the comparison? And are there ties between the social context and the use of figurative language? And we will tackle these problems in turn. In order to answer such questions, we definitely need data. So we turn to a data source that is adequate for our task. We look at Amazon.com product reviews. You can see on the screen a screenshot from the Amazon.com website with a review. Amazon.com product reviews are good for this, first of all, because people have to describe products and convince others to buy them or not. So they will be rich in comparisons because comparisons are descriptive. This example has a very nice comparison. Her vocal talents make this number shine brighter than gold. Another useful thing that comes from product reviews are measures of social context in the form of helpfulness ratings. So this review has been found helpful by 16 out of 16 people. And star ratings. This review is a good review, a positive review. And finally, we have topical context information for free because we know that this is a review of an album, so it comes from the music category. Using product reviews from Amazon.com, we put together a figurative comparison data set that consists of 1,400 sentences with marked comparisons, annotated by mechanical Turkers. This data set is freely available on the project website. So with this data in hand, we can move forward to the task of characterizing figurative language and answering the questions from before. So the first thing we're looking at is topical context. And the simplest question we could ask here is it simply more likely to encounter figurative language in some contexts other than in others? We actually chose the categories we look at with this idea in mind. We look at book reviews, music reviews, jewelry, and electronic product reviews. And it turns out that indeed, it's way more likely to find figurative comparisons in book and music reviews rather than in jewelry and more so in electronic product reviews. This is all good and it's already an interesting feature, but does it go even deeper, and does topical context actually drive word choice in figurative and literal language in a different way? What I mean by this, consider the word melody. If we encounter this word when talking about music, we might find such a sentence: the song feels like a boring melody. But we can also encounter it in a less expected situation, such as in a book review. Her book is like a sweet melody. In this case, the second example is figurative, but the first one is literal. The intuition here is that if the word is more expected or more specific to the context, maybe it's more likely for the sentence to be literal. So to attempt to capture this, we use a simple measure of specificity of a word with respect to a topic, which is simply the ratio of how often the word appears in the given topic versus how often it appears in the entire data set. Right? So this captures our intuition. Melody is very specific to music reviews and very unspecific to book reviews. Right? If we look at the distribution of these values over the entire training set, so this is the distribution of specificity scores for literal comparisons. It's a density plot on the y-axis. So where the plot is thicker, there is more probability mass, right? We can see a bump for words of average specificity, but also a bump for very specific words. So comparisons, literal comparisons, use specific words. However, for figurative comparisons, the bump disappears, so there is no tendency to use topic-specific words when making figurative comparisons. So topical context has interesting connections with the use of figurative language. We move on to the structure of a comparison. A comparison, we've seen that it's between two things. Can we use the fact that a comparison attempts to define a connection between two things? And can we use some other form of similarity, such as lexical similarity between the things being compared? So let's revisit the initial examples. The song is brighter than gold, or sterling is cheaper than gold. In this case, in the figurative example, song and gold are highly dissimilar words, whereas sterling and gold are similar, and you could substitute them to one another, or they could occur in similar contexts. So the intuition is that a similarity in a vector space model would tell us that in literal cases, the things being compared are more similar, and in figurative examples, they are less similar. And again, we look at the distribution, and we observe exactly what we expect. In particular, there is a bump for very similar words in literal comparisons that does not occur for figurative comparisons. Again, the intuition is that comparisons between similar things are more likely to be literal. Moving on, there has been research on metaphor, right? So there is an idea that there is an underlying idea of figurative language that maybe applies to similes as well. So we use the features used by Tsevkov et al. For metaphor detection. These features are concreteness, imageability, and supersenses, which are the top-level WordNet categories of words. So these features were shown to work well for detecting metaphors. Furthermore, they're predicted from vector space embeddings that are also dumped in their model. So this is the model used by Tsevkov et al. For metaphor detection, and we also consider their features in our work. So with all of this insight in mind, we turn to the prediction task of telling whether an unseen comparison is literal or figurative. So as a reminder, our features are topic-specific features and topic-agnostic features, which use the comparison structure. They use metaphor features from existing work on metaphor, and definiteness, which is another feature that I don't have time to talk about, but it's kind of a syntactic equivalent of concreteness, which has been used previously for metaphor. To see whether this works, we compare it with a very simple bag of words approach, right? Which actually turns out to work pretty well. These scores are reasonably good for such a difficult task. Why is this? So these are the top two words in a bag of words model that classifies figurative comparisons well. These words turn out to be discriminative in product reviews because they come from fixed expressions like larger than life, which people like to use. And also when people don't like a product, they tend to say that it's like crap, or that some headphones sounded like crap. People apparently use this often in reviews, and a bag of words model is able to capture this kind of fixed expressions well. But we've seen a lot of examples of figurative comparisons until now in this talk, and they don't seem to be fixed expressions, right? So our hope is that we can capture lots more different kinds of comparisons using the linguistics insight from before. And we actually do, and we perform better. And it turns out that the best feature by a large margin is actually the structural similarity, so the similarity between the two things being compared. So it's important to treat comparisons in a specific way. It turns out that topic information is also very important, and is the second best feature. And the metaphor features are still useful, creeping into the top three in the form of imageability. Also importantly, when we put this together with the bag of words model, we do significantly better than the bag of words model itself alone, showing that the two approaches are complementary and capture different kinds of figurative comparisons. Another nice result is that we're doing not too bad with respect to human performance. We estimated human performance in a very optimistic way on this task, as majority voting among three annotators. And we are within 10% of this score, which is a reasonable performance. So we have a system that performs well, but Was it worth the effort, or could we have just used the, some state-of-the-art metaphor system, specifically the metaphor features alone? It turns out that using using the entire training data, this is a learning curve. Using the entire training data, we do better in terms of accuracy than using just the metaphor system. But this is not the only advantage. We are also encouraged to think that using the linguistic insight that we pinpoint, we can perform better and we can leverage more data better, as we can see by seeing the trend of our full system, which seems to be able to make use of more data better. This is important because for this kind of tasks, annotation is pretty expensive. So the better we make use of data, the better it is. So we have a good classifier that can tell literal from figurative comparisons, and this is important because we've seen that there are a lot of reviews and a lot of texts on the internet comparing things that people don't like with crap, and you wouldn't want your product to make recommendations based on such data. So we can filter such examples out using our system. Finally, as I promised, there are connections between figurative language and social context, and we can finally see them. So the social context of a review consists of the star rating, which shows how, that shows the opinion of the reviewer towards the product, and the helpfulness rating, which shows how the other readers from the Amazon.com website perceive the review. So we first look at the star rating, which is a measure of the intrinsic opinion, which shows the feeling of the author of the review towards the product. So on the x-axis, we have the 5 possible star ratings from 1 to 5, bigger is better. And on the y-axis, the higher up we go, the more likely it is to find figurative comparisons. So which way could this go? Is it more likely to have figurative comparison in good reviews, in bad reviews? It turns out there is kind of a weak descending trend in the mid-range. So the better the review, the less likely it is to find figurative comparisons. But for extreme cases, for very good and very bad reviews, actually people use way more figurative language, and way more than average, and way more than the mid-range of the ratings. This kind of shows that people will use more figurative language when expressing strong opinions, even if they are good or bad opinions, right? Now let's look at the extrinsic opinion. So at how a review is perceived by others. And we can measure this by helpfulness. So helpfulness is the ratio of how many people who took the time to rate a certain review found it helpful. We throw away all the reviews that weren't rated by at least 10 readers. So the x-axis here, if it's 0, it means nobody who rated the review said it's helpful. If it's 1, it means everybody found it helpful, and everything in between. And again, the y-axis is the same. The higher up we go, the more likely to find figurative comparisons. And what happens is, it turns out to be pretty constant for the low and the mid-range of reviews. But when we get to the actual helpful reviews, it turns out that people find them more and more helpful as figurative language is used less and less. This might be explained by the fact that people prefer reviews that go to the point. This could be an explanation. It is not the case, however, that this is because of the star ratings, because we control for that. And it's not an effect of better or worse reviews being found more helpful. To sum up, our contribution consists of a data set of figurative and literal comparisons that can be used for all kinds of studies and for figurative language detection. We show for the first time strong ties between figurative language and social context and how this affects perception of communication. We show that topic information is a good feature for figurative language detection. And we argue that similes are different than metaphors and deserve special computational treatment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I've got many questions. Okay, so you said that to measure if a product review is figurative or not, you use this measure of specificity. And then, so for example, then you pick some kind of a topic like melody.
Yes.
And then you see how often this word has occurred together with what was being compared.
Okay, so
question is, how are these guys always objects in the sentences, or how do you decide what to pick? How did you decide to pick melody here, for example?
oh no, this is just an example, but what we find is that figurative comparisons are less likely to use words taken from the topic about which the text is written, right? So if the text is about, if it's about music, then a usage of the word melody our insight is that it's less likely to be figurative because it's relevant to the subject matter, right? Whereas in a book review, the word melody is less expected, so that might be a signal or warning that you have to treat it differently and it's figurative.
Okay, so question is, why did you pick word melody here and not boring or sweet?
Oh, because of the comparison. So the comparison is between the song and melody.
Okay.
And in the second case, it's between book and melody. So we use the comparison structure here as well.
So you know, you do some kind of a parsing and you know what is being compared with what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting talk. Could you say maybe a couple words to the definition of the imageability?
Yeah,
because
sure.
my intuition is that it's actually that would be harder to define than something like metaphoricity or something like that. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. There is actually so imageability is a feature that says about a word how likely it is to stir up a sensory feeling in the reader, be it a visual feeling or auditive or whatever kind of sensory. So there was a great talk today about building a sensory lexicon. So there is ongoing work on this by different groups. It's a very interesting research question. In this case, the data comes from the MRC, Psycholinguistic Machine Readable Dictionary. And words like cinnamon and kiss are considered imageable, whereas words like cask and pugilist are considered less imageable. What Tsetkov et al. Did was train a classifier on word embeddings to predict these ratings so they can generalize on out-of-domain words. We adopt the same approach.
So at the end you said that the more figurative language people use, the less helpful the review was. But not all figurative language is created equally. You had a lot of examples, and your final example of figurative language about drunken statistics is a good use of figurative language, and sounds like crap is a bad use of figurative language. So do you have any insight as to what good figurative languages and bad figurative languages, and maybe the good figurative language might have a helpful review?
That's a great question and a hard to answer question, but it's worth pursuing. So our intuition is that figurative language is quite strong and quite an efficient persuasive mechanism, I guess. So we've been looking at some debates, and it turns out that people who use them very often draw comparisons to other things that people relate to more easily. So in this case, it might be that that being figurative can be helpful if used right. However, I mean, it seems that in product reviews, people don't find them helpful if they have too many figurative comparisons. I cannot say why. It might be connected to the context of product reviews. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. We have to move to the next talk.